Hi, I'm Chuck Colson with this week's 2-Minute Warning. For years now, people have asked me about the connection between prison fellowship and BreakPoint. What's a Christian worldview ministry have to do with a prison ministry? Why are you ministering to prisoners and their families and at the same time talking on the radio about things like traditional marriage or abortion? Well, years ago I received a letter from a faithful prison fellowship supporter. He said, "You've got a wonderful prison ministry, but I don't know if I can keep supporting you because you keep confusing things by talking about biblical inerrancy." Well, I replied to him and said, "It's because I believe the Bible that I go into the prisons in the first place. You love our work, but don't want us to talk about why we do it." Next time, he actually sent a larger gift. And it really was my experience in prison that led me to begin teaching biblical worldview. Going into the prisons all those years, I saw the crime problem wasn't caused by poverty and environment, as people thought at the time. It was the breakup of the family, the lack of moral training during the morally formative years. Those things cause crime. So as I began to study the issue, I realized that I had to speak truth to the culture, even as I reached out in love to the prisoners. I had to explain the reason for the huge crime problem. Just a few weeks ago, a pastor came up to me and said, "I get it, Chuck. What BreakPoint and Prison Fellowship are doing is making truth and love visible." Wow, that's it. A great way of saying why Prison Fellowship and BreakPoint are so interconnected. We are attempting to be living witnesses of the fact that truth and love, the two principal characteristics of God, are inseparable. We teach and proclaim the truth of God through our worldview ministry, and we proclaim and live out the love of God by reaching out to suffering prisoners. It's the truth of God that sends me and thousands of Prison Fellowship volunteers behind bars to share the love of God. And it's the love of God that compels us to proclaim the truth of God to those made in His image and to the culture at large. But that balance of truth and love is so critical. On the one hand, it's a fine and noble thing to proclaim the truth. But if all you focus on is that truth without living out the commands of the truth, without visiting the prisoner, healing the sick, feeding the hungry, then you can lapse into a very dry, dusty doctrine and ice-cold legalism. On the other hand, if we focus on love to the expense of truth, we get what Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the great German Christian martyr, called cheap grace. In fact, I'd venture to say that a lot of heresies throughout church history have come when believers have favored love over truth. Look at the social gospel movement earlier in the last century. I've read a lot about Walter Rauschenbusch, and I so admire his desire to help the poor, to go into the inner cities where other Christians weren't going. But what he did in the process was to abandon orthodoxy. And I can't but believe that the poor he reached with God's love also needed to be reached with God's truth. What we're seeking to show here at Prison Fellowship and BreakPoint is that when we hold truth and love together, we Christians can make a great impact on individuals and on the culture. To all of you who support us in Prison Fellowship and BreakPoint, thank you. This is a critical time for us as our fiscal year ends. Times are tough in this country right now, but we would so appreciate any gift you can give to help us continue to show God's love and proclaim His truth. I'm Chuck Colson. That's this week's 2-Minute Warning.